Hey everyone, I know it's been a while, and I hope everyone is doing well. I've been hoping to get back on track soon with videos on the regular, but life got in the way for quite a while. It's been over 4 years since I last uploaded, so please bear with me as I attempt to get back into this wonderful habit of making these videos for you. I hope you've been well in the time we've been apart, and know that I have had you and this channel in my mind the entirety of the time that we've been apart. Aside from that, let's go ahead and just dive into this week's study. Our last study saw Jesus not only healing, but doing so from small distance. The faith that we saw from the centurion was truly incredible, and the healing his servant received is miraculous, but explainable in a lot of ways by those who might be skeptical. The next scene is much less refutable, though. The healing of the centurion's servant happened in Capernaum, and Jesus doesn't seem to have stayed very long there because Luke records that the next miracle is very soon afterwards. Note that the Greek word hexes means successive. It means after or following or the morrow, next, etc. You get the idea. It's likely not the next day as some versions translate because it's not followed by the word for day. Therefore, it's the next in succession, in context, of the events by Jesus. Now, how long afterward? We don't know for sure. But to get to Nain, they would have had to have walked over 20 miles, or 35 kilometers, to get from Capernaum on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee to the other side of Mount Tabor, which is to the southwest of the sea. Let's read the passage in Luke chapter 7, verses 11 through 17. Soon afterward, he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came up and touched the bier, and the bearer stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him spread throughout the whole of Judea and all of the surrounding country. Jesus, at this point, can't seem to go anywhere without a crowd following him. His popularity is still on the rise, and I think it's important to note that Luke distinguishes his disciples, and then, as Luke says, much people. One can say that Luke is referring to the 12 disciples, but I think that there could be a distinction between all the people who are following Christ spiritually, learning from him, and then there's everyone else who's seeing the miracles and wanting to see more. We'll see later on that there are people following him just for the excitement of it, and for the needs that Jesus would meet by giving them food, and many in the crowd will even try to make him their earthly king. In fact, it'll get so bad that there will be so many people following him just for the earthly focus that he'll have to run off most of them. Today, though, they will all be witnesses. So Jesus approaches Nain and gets to the city's gates, and he can see that there's a funeral coming his direction. This widow's son has died. Jesus refers to him as a young man in verse 14, the Greek word neoniskos, a youth meaning under 40 or a young man. So this is not a boy, but since he's still with his mother, he's likely not married because Luke would have probably referred to his widow. Therefore, most likely he's probably a teenager. He is her only son, so the tragedy is magnified in that fact. The funeral would have been loud and easily got anyone's attention. In our modern culture, funerals are somber and relatively quiet affairs, but back then there would be loud wailing and carrying on over the dead. Not only were the loved ones of the man and his mother there, but it would be common practice to hire professional wailers, people whose job it was to wail and mourn loudly at funerals. The funeral was carrying this young man out of the city, which would have required coming through the gates to the burial places in the surrounding area. Burial places, they can't be inside the city as they would be unclean things. Let's also not ignore the providential placement of Jesus at this time and place to have his crowd meet the funeral crowd right at the city gates, which is the place it would have been the most visible to most of the people of the city. Not only did Jesus bring his own audience, but the people of the funeral and the people not of the funeral that were just going about their daily lives were going to be there to witness what's about to happen next. Well, you can imagine the shock of the people as Jesus comes up to the woman, who is likely standing next to the stretcher which they're carrying him on, and he tells her, "Weep not." What do you mean, weep not? What an absurd thing to say to this woman, who's not only lost her husband at some point, but now her only son. Jeremiah chapter 6 verse 26 says, "O daughter of my people, put on sackcloth and roll in ashes. Make mourning as for an only son, most bitter lamentation, for suddenly the destroyer will come upon us." God uses what this woman is going through as to what Israel should be feeling for losing their God. Death and destruction is about to come onto this people that Jeremiah is speaking to, and few will survive. They should mourn like this woman is mourning. Jesus, likely a stranger to her, is coming up to her and telling her not to weep? Luke calls it compassion, and we'll understand that in due time, but to her, it might have been the cruelest of pranks. She had every reason and right to weep, as the most important thing of her life is gone forever. While no other gospel gives this account, it's hard not to imagine the disgusted and possibly hateful looks Jesus likely received as he said these very simple words to her. Shock would have rippled through the crowd at Jesus' words to his mother, but then to reach out and touch the stretcher the dead boy lay upon would have been unheard of. It was necessary in those days to wash the body and to prepare it for burial with oils and spices and a cloth, but that was done by close family, and they would have then been unclean for a time. Or a complete stranger to come up and touch the stretcher, therefore making him unclean, was something just simply not done in Jewish society. The men who were carrying the young man froze, probably not sure what to do because this was so unusual. Jesus, though, was not made unclean through his actions. Psalm 33:9 speaks to the power of God, saying that, "For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm." The power of creation and of life and death is, according to John 1, Jesus's to wield. Isaiah 26:19 tells us that the Messiah would use the power to prove who he was to the world. It says, "Your dead shall live, their bodies shall rise. You who dwell in the dust, awake and sing for joy. For your dew is a dew of light, and the earth will give birth to the dead." It is prophesied that the Messiah would raise the dead, and here we find the very first instance of this sign as Jesus treats the young man as if he's just sleeping, touching the stretcher as if it would not make him unclean under the law, and says to him, "Young man, I say to you, arise." All it took was a single word, arise, for the young man to sit up and begin speaking. Well, what did he say? Only those who were there know, but seeing him sit up and hearing him speak made those around in righteous fear of God. Only the power of God can bring someone back from the dead. Jesus scoops him up off the stretcher and gives him to his mother, probably standing him up on his feet. A single command is all that it takes for one with the power to do so, to raise someone from beyond the veil of death. In the next chapter of Luke, chapter 8, verse 54, we'll see Jesus raise Jairus' daughter with the same words, "Child, arise." John chapter 11, 43 describes Jesus saying to Lazarus to come out. Even beyond Jesus, we'll see this power manifested from the simplest of things. Peter is able to raise Tabitha, or Dorcas, with the word arise. In Acts chapter 9, verse 40, Paul is able to raise Ichicus from the dead by a mere touch in Acts chapter 20 and verse 10. Truthfully, I wonder whether Jesus said with a smile to the young man's shocked mother to take him and get him something to eat, the way he did with Jairus' daughter. The crowds would have been mostly Jews, and absolutely knew what this miracle meant. Even if they didn't understand the scope of it yet, they knew the stories of Elijah raising the widow's son in 1 Kings chapter 7, verses 17 through 24, and how simply touching the bones of Elisha brought a man back to life from 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 21. For the living to reclaim one who has already crossed to the land of the dead is not unheard of, but it might as well be, because it takes an act of God. And they had just witnessed it before their very eyes. They praised God and knew that Jesus was a man of great importance spiritually. They felt that the silence they'd experienced for the past 400 years had finally broken, and God had visited his people again. They may not believe that Jesus is the Son of God yet, which is likely since the claim was not public, but they certainly believed Jesus to be from God, having just witnessed this miracle. So, what do these people do next? Well, the very same thing anyone would do if they had just seen the single most amazing thing they had ever seen in their lives. They start telling people. A story like this doesn't stay bottled up, and it begins to spread, just as the other stories of Jesus spread. His popularity is just going to continue to grow at this point. Well, next time, we'll hear from a character that we haven't heard from in a while. John the Baptist is getting impatient sitting in prison and letting his faith waver because of it. So he sends some of his followers to Jesus and doesn't get the response that he expects. If you liked this part of our study, be sure to like and subscribe. My goal is to get a new episode a week in this Bible study series. Even if I don't get topical videos up, I'm trying to get back in the habit of continuing our study in Luke. Put in the comments what you think the young man said as he returned to this world, and to who? His mother? Jesus? The people, the pallbearers? Was he thankful? Was he confused? Was he annoyed like Samuel was when Saul conjured him up in 1 Samuel 28:15? Also, if you want to support my efforts to make these videos, leave a donation via the PayPal link below. Thanks for watching.